Hello, everyone. We're just going to wait a few seconds for folks to come in to the webinar. It's going a bit slowly. If you can just, go into the chat and let us know where you're coming from and what brought you to tonight's program. And I'll go ahead and get started. Well, good evening. I'm Omar Acevedo, and I'm the Literary Program Coordinator at the Mark Twain House and Museum here in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm delighted to host tonight's program. The Mark Twain House and Museum's virtual programs are produced in part with support honoring Frank Lord, a beloved trustee of the museum who passed away a few years ago. We are happy to honor his memory with these programs. We are also incredibly grateful to the Wish You Well Foundation and Connecticut Public WNPR for supporting this and our other virtual programs. Now, let me introduce our guests. Tonight, we are welcoming Hua Hsu and Juhea Kim for a discussion of Stay True, Hua's memoir about growing up, friendship, and searching for meaning and belonging. Our moderator is Juhea Kim. She is a writer, artist, advocate, and editor of Peaceful Dumpling, a sustainable online magazine. She earned her BA in Art and Archaeology from Princeton University. Her best-selling debut novel, Beasts of a Little Land, was named a finalist for the 2022 Dayton Literary Peace Prize and a Best Book of 2021 by Harper's Bazaar, Real Simple, Miss, and Portland Monthly. Our author is Hua Hsu. He is a staff writer at The New Yorker and a professor of literature at Bard College. He serves on the executive board of the Asian American Writers Workshop. He was formerly a fellow at the New America Foundation and the Dorothy and Lewis B. Cullman Center at the New York Public Library. We encourage you to have a conversation in the chat along with our guests. If you have a specific question, you can post that directly into our Q&A section. Please also note that you can click on live transcript to see live auto captioning for this event. So please sit back and enjoy, and I will turn it over to Juhea and to Hua.
Thank you for that great introduction, Omar. I'm so happy to be here to discuss Hua's wonderful memoir, Stay True. I was so moved by this memoir, especially the ending hit me in a way and left me devastated. I hadn't thought about grief in these terms, and the way you put it just made such an impact on me, and I'm really thrilled to be talking to you about this. First, I kind of want to talk about how your work is in conversation with a lot of other works of art and criticism. And one of them is highlighted in the epigraph, and I will read from it. Only the future can provide the key to the interpretation of the past, and it is only in the sense that we can speak of an ultimate objectivity in history. It is at once the justification and the explanation of history that the past throws light on the future, and the future throws light on the past. So I get the sense that the future is a moving target, or rather the past is a moving target from the future that keeps pushing forward. How did your interpretation of the past in this book change as you wrote over a 20-year period?
Wow, yeah, that's a great question. Juhea, thanks for doing this with me. Omar, thanks for having me, and thanks everyone who's tuned in virtually. Really looking forward to this conversation. As you noted, I was working on this for 20 some years, and I basically started writing things that ended up in the book, although I didn't know I was writing a book at the time when I was 21. So it was literally the day after a good friend of mine was killed. And when I was writing back then, I was very much just obsessed with archiving the past, just never forgetting the past. Because, it's one of the beautiful things about friendship. It just, that's how your friends are basically your external storage device. Like that's how you sort of pass the time, is sort of like having these friends. And so once one of those friendships ends, I was just very obsessed with sort of collecting all that I could from our shared past, because he was no longer around to do that with me. Over time, I think I realized that what I needed was to think about what this meant for the future, and for sort of, you don't really move on in matters of grief. It's really about moving forward. And that quote comes from a book that my friend Ken, who the book is essentially about, left in my apartment one night when we were studying. And I hadn't read it when we were undergrads, but I read it as an adult, and I realized that in this very eerie way, it had a lot to say about how I was thinking about the past, and how I was thinking about the future, and sort of what I needed to do to be able to move forward.
Yeah. Um, I also wanted to ask, you said 20 some years. That's such a tremendously long time to dedicate to writing a book. Um, what was the driving force that kept you working on Stay True during that long period of time?
Well, I wasn't continuously working on it for 20 years, but it's just something that I knew that I would return to. Essentially, when I was 21, when this thing happened to Ken, and sort of affected my friends and I in college, I knew that writing in that very moment, I was 21, writing was a place to go. It was like a way to feel as though I was being very present, but really escape into something else. Like I was deep in sort of like processing, and writing down memories, and writing down inside jokes, writing letters to him. I knew that I would continue doing this probably as long as I lived, because it was just sort of like I'm not a fastidious journal taker. Like I don't really like write in a journal, but I had bought this journal kind of immediately in the immediate aftermath, and I was very into writing in it, and excuse me, and just sort of thinking about the past, and thinking about how the present was feeling in my journal. So excuse me, I kind of knew that I would continue writing. I didn't know that I would become a writer, or that I would turn it into a book or anything like that. But I think all those years I was just really trying to never forget. Like I think that there's um, a degree to which I spent years trying to write down, like what his laugh sounded like, or what certain things looked like, or what certain things smelled like, the sensation of, lighting a cigarette, things like that. And so I was very much, I think, like a lot of writers, there's just something that you're thinking, that you're trying to work through. Maybe there's like a description that you're trying to work on. And it takes a long time to figure out how to do that. And even though for the past 20 years I've been working as like a journalist, it rarely intersected with this project. But the whole time I was thinking about it as I was describing other things or describing other people. Like I sort of knew that I was honing my skills to one day return to this project.
So a lot of that resonates with me. Oh, first of all, I kind of forgot with your earlier answer, the way you said your friends are your external hard drive. Like that makes a lot of sense to me. It's just how my friendships work in my life. So I completely agree with you there. And the way you said that you weren't thinking of this as a book so much as trying really to truthfully capture as much as possible what happened. Um, a lot of the times I feel like when you go out with the aim to write a book, it actually works against you. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For example, like I'm working on my second book, but because now I'm an author, I don't have to air quote, I am an author. Um, But because now I know that it is likely to be published and will actually become a book, the pressure and the expectations of myself and others is totally different. Whereas the first one, you're just trying to write something truthful,
Yeah.
right? Without even the expectations that it's going to come out with a cover and an ISBN. And
Yeah.
I really think that that purity really helps the art. So, and I really get the sense that that's what drove you.
Do you
So
think do you think you're writing differently now? Like writing the follow-up?
um,
Not the actual follow-up, but just like, has it affected your process or sort
sophomore
of how
work,
you think about writing? Yeah.
the sophomore work. Yes, and I was gonna ask you what you're working on next, but we can kind of organically talk in that direction as well. It's very different because first now I know what people's expectations are. I know what Americans readers' expectations are. I know
Hmm.
what international readers expect, and their tastes all differ, and my own desire differ. And I'm getting requests for like, can you write more historical? And really, like
Hmm.
as an artist, I want to try something completely different. And I even get the feedback, well, that's not going to sell. You already know the formula that sells. There's a lot of commercial expectation that gets put on. So that makes it all very difficult. And I really miss no one telling me what to write except my agent. So I'm gonna ask you though later what you're working on
Sure.
next. Okay. Hold on to that thought. I'm primarily a fiction writer, although I do occasionally write nonfiction, and it was very interesting for me to see how you create characters out of the actual people in your life. I felt like the character Hua was
It's very
very off
interesting to them too.
to to the real people.
Yeah, yeah, because I'm friends
Yes.
with, I would say, like 90% of the people in the book still. So
Mm, still, yes, that's very important. I get that as a writer.
yeah.
I felt like the character Hua was very honestly drawn with flaws that we can expect from young adults. You know, that's hard to do because you're the one who's writing it, and you're older and wiser. And so it might be like hard to reveal all the, young adult kind of, bits and pieces. And others that I would expect to be more fully present in a novel, like Hua's parents, are more in the background. And some
Mhm.
of the friends who appear many times throughout the book are not described in great detail in terms of physique or personality. And for me, all these things were very refreshing in the sense that this is actually my personal shortcoming, and I don't always know when to stop or step back in terms of characterization. And I get forced to fully flesh out characters that I just sometimes want to keep in the background. And I want to know how you made these decisions, and you did it with grace. And I think internally it made sense, but I want to know how you made these decisions.
Wow, I appreciate it. I appreciate what you're saying because it wasn't intentional, I would say. Whenever I'm writing, if I'm like profiling someone for the New Yorker, there's always the paragraph where it's like so and so was wearing like the shirt was draped on their spindly frame, or their laugh sounded like X, Y. Like I'm very bad at those descriptions. Like I have a hard time. I just don't tend to like describing people's physiques, unless there's, it's funny or there's something really
Mm.
distinctive there. And so that also informed how I wrote about my friends in this book. Someone said to me early on, like, Ken is this presence, but there's something spectral about him. He's not completely defined, or he's not clearly described. And that person was reading it as this intentional sort of, I don't, not like deification, but just sort of like you're drawn to him as this like aura or this energy. And I'm like, that's true, but it's also just that I'm not that good at description. And so I think I was very self-conscious about that aspect of it. And so rather than trying to do it and doing it poorly, I just didn't describe people as much as maybe maybe I could have. But it also just spoke to the book itself, because so much of it is about memory. and not actually memory being useful sometimes. Sometimes you misremember things, and a lot of the book is me misremembering things, or me getting hung up on my own memory and crowding out other people's memories, if that makes sense. Like, there are definitely moments in the book that friends have read and said, like, I was there too, or this also happened that day. But because if you read the book, there are these moments where I begin doubting my own grasp of the story or my own grasp of who people are. I kind of wanted those, I kind of wanted to write it from the perspective of like being hung up on your own memories, right? And so that's also why I think sometimes I didn't go back and like talk to my friends or report it the way some people report memoirs. Because I kind of wanted the faultiness of memory and just kind of like how I remember people, even though a lot of them are still in my life. I also just felt like things that people, it also just seemed very true to who one is when you're in your late teens or early 20s. So, the book takes place essentially between 1995 and 1999. I was a college student. When you're young, you're just always looking forward to the next adventure. You're always just thinking that in extremes, like this is going to be like the best, this is the worst, this is the most fun I've ever had. Like, I've never been this bored before. And you're not really, you're not really paying attention to like the granular details. Like, you're not really plugged into like the basic quotidian pleasures of life. You're just like trying to like be the hottest person, or like do the most extreme things. And so I think when you're observing other people, like if it's in class or your friends, you're sort of drawn to things they're doing or things they're saying, and not so much like not so much like physical appearance, or at least I wasn't. I was sort of like drawn to what people were wearing, or how loud they would be, but I would be hard pressed to like describe what they looked like. Does that make any sense, or do I sound like
No, no, no.
like a
It
totally
totally makes sense.
unobservant person?
No, no, no. It makes complete sense. That's why I said it made a lot of internal logic. It was logical within the framework of this book, the way
Yeah.
you phrase how this is about how you remember things, and not even about objectivity, but the faultiness of memory. Yeah, like if I were to go back and honestly write a memoir about my high school and college friends, a lot of it's gonna get vague,
Yeah.
because that's actually more honest than trying to project my adult power of observation and making up memory in a sense. So I truly appreciate that thought. What's interesting is that you you're right. You don't fully describe Ken's physique per se, but I got a very vivid sense of Ken, and I even could picture him in my mind. But that's probably because not you didn't describe, the shape of his eyes and nose and lips, but I feel like I know him well from the way you describe his demeanor and his attitude, and I can just get the sense of his laughter, for example, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So he just becomes vivid, but you do it in this secondary way, very evocative way.
That's cool. Thanks for saying that.
So
I
let's
mean, yeah.
yeah, go ahead. What?
No, I mean, I was just thinking too that there's like another friend of mine who's in the book quite a bit, but like I never really describe him. But one thing that really defined his character to me is that he had a vanity license plate that said
Mhm.
Buck Wild, because he was
Mm,
he was like the person who would always, get into fights and whatnot. And to me, that is like that is so much more descriptive of who this person is than, like they were
exactly.
5'8", they had, like long hair or whatever. And similarly with Ken, I mean, I think this is kind of amusing, I think, to people who are friends from college, is just that, yeah, maybe I don't describe what he looks like, but I describe a lot of my own kind of admiration for him, or my
Mm,
own sort of projection onto him, because so much of it is also projection. Like, the way we figure out who we are is by like pointing at a close friend and figuring out like, well, the Venn diagram of us is like 90% overlapping, but it's in those micro distinctions that like I am me and you are you. And I think one thing that I think comes across as, or I'm assuming it comes across, is that even though I was very suspicious of him at first because we were into very different things, like I just really, I really admired him. I thought he was like a confident, handsome person. And so that's almost, that like serves the text more, I think, than me being able to like describe him and then you judging whether or not you think he's good looking and confident and funny and all these things, because I'm the one who's sort of like hung up on these memories.
Yeah, and what you say about how we figure out who we are as people when we are on the verge of adulthood at that age is exactly right. We compare ourselves to our closest friends and we see where we overlap. Okay, these are our good qualities. This is how we belong together. And then these are our differences. This is what makes me unique. And that finding out process, that discovery is so exciting at that stage in life. And you probably can't ever replicate that no matter how much you mature later in life. That only just happens at that time. It's so beautiful. And I remember that very clearly. So I want to talk a little bit more about Ken's character. So, he's so beautifully described, and like there are these tender moments that I really underlined, like the scene where you observe him giving a balloon to a child at Nordstrom's where he works. And when I see that, like, I see a man wearing black pants and black dress shoes because he works at the shoe department at Nordstrom's, and I see him very clearly without you telling me what he's wearing or how he looks in the 90s. So you do such a wonderful job of placing these key moments throughout the memoir in a non-linear way. And I thought that that was really admirable in terms of craft. How did you know where to put these scenes in the narrative? Do you like work with note cards, or like, well, how do you get there?
That's a really that's a good question. It's I don't really know how to explain it. So when I'm writing, like a piece of criticism or a profile for the New Yorker, I'm very obsessive about structure. Like I kind of know exactly where something is going to begin and where something's going to end, or more likely, like I know how I want to begin and how I want to end. Like I know what feeling I want the reader to be left with, whether it's like passing on my enthusiasm or just empowering the reader and saying like by the end of the piece, like, look, I don't know, like maybe you can figure out this conundrum that I brought us to, because we should be I always think the reader and the writer should be in cahoots or sort of like be collaborators. And so I didn't really have that with this book. Like I didn't know how to begin it, how to end it. I didn't really know what would be in it at all. I did have, dozens of pages, maybe hundreds of pages of notes and journal entries and just little scraps of writing that I collected over the years that I thought might be in it, but I didn't know how I wanted to end, how I wanted to finish, but I also didn't know what feeling I wanted to leave the reader with. Does that make sense? Like with a piece of criticism, usually I'm like, I know that I want the reader to like go out and now think these questions or ask these questions or demand this. With this, I really didn't know. And so it was just something I figured out on the page, which is very different from how I usually write. I didn't use note cards, but this is going to sound like sponsored content, but I used this program Scrivener, which is like this word processing thing that it's very clunky and not particularly easy to use, but it's sort of like you can write 7 different Microsoft Word documents at once. Like you can put things side by side. You can have these little note cards. Like it's very easy to manage a whole bunch of information, but still feel like you're just working on a single document. Does that make sense? Like, because everything is sort of like outlining as you're doing it. And so I would just write these different scenes or write these different moments and then notice resonances. Like there are a lot of things that I feel are intentional, but maybe I didn't intend to do them aloud, like things that just sort of clicked into place as I was writing. And a lot of that just came with like moving stuff around, or realizing that there are certain words that I mentioned on page 20 that get mentioned again on like page 160. And so just sort of building out from these different nodes. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure that there's a linear answer to this, because I
So
didn't think of it as a linear book.
right. So I'm
It's
like
like
not.
quite circular, actually.
It is, and that's what I was trying to get at. And I was like, how did you devise that? How did you structure that intentionally? But you're saying that a lot of it was unintentional. So a lot of what you said resonated with me strongly, because I write very much with what am I going to leave the reader with. When I begin a novel, I already know the feeling that I want to give to them at the end. And um, so I'm super structured that way, I guess. But this sense of going into it without knowing exactly how or what you want to leave the reader with, I'm very surprised, because it if it's very well done, and I didn't know that it was spontaneous. But I think that is completely in keeping with the spirit of this book, which is another layer of beauty, I think. um, and yeah, and I love that those notes kind of came about organically, as opposed to you very intentionally putting all the note cards, like, like a detective, where does this fit? So that's very
I
beautiful.
I was more of, like I did approach it as a, not as in like an actual detective, but
Mhm.
I did think that there was like a mystery to be solved when I first started writing all of this. I thought everything, like I have this kind of padded envelope that I've had for like since the mid 90s, full of things like ephemera of friendship, like old cigarette, like pack of cigarettes, matchbooks, receipts, all sorts of things that I stole from his apartment afterwards, or that he left in mine, old cassettes, along with the journal that I was keeping all these years. And I think for a while I did view all of this as, I thought there were clues. Like I thought that there was something that could be pieced together if only I put all these clues out, all of these like exhibits, or sort of like materials. And it was really just in the course of writing it, and I realized that I don't know, there's no sense to it. It's just like an incredibly random, sad, terrible thing happened, and there's no amount of time I could spend in the past that would sort of like impose any logic on it. There's no story. It just happened, and the story sort of was what remained, like sort of like how we all brought him with us as we continued living. Um, and so a lot of it was just kind of trying to figure out, not necessarily how to leave the reader, but like how to leave myself, because there's a line in the book early on where I say like, and you once thought you would write the saddest story ever, because when I was 21, like, nothing approaching this level of tragedy had ever happened in my life, or probably any of our lives among my friends and I. And so I think I was just very fixated on the tragedy of it all. But then in the course of writing it, I realized that, like you pointed out, like I point out my own flaws a lot in this book. Like I am the sort of clown in the book in a way, like, because I'm sort of making light of how pretentious and sort of stuffy and elitist I was at the time, and sort of how blind I was to, you know, people and sort of what they could offer. And so I think once I realized that it could be kind of funny, there could be pockets of joy, and that wouldn't diminish the tragedy, that wouldn't diminish, like, the like utter anguish of what happened. I think then it became something that I understood as like I realized as I was doing it that that's what I needed to do, and that that's where it needed to end. That was what I was trying to do this whole time, not just capture how like incredibly depressed we were and I was, but how happy we were before it, and like and to some degree afterwards too, not because it happened, but because we still had our friends, and we still had each other, and we still had these memories.
Yeah, and I think that's where all the true poignancy really came from, that contrast and from the growth that this pretentious, because young, everybody's
Yeah, yeah.
pretentious when they're young. So this young, innocent the growth that he experiences from this pain, and how that changes him. That's where the poignancy was for me personally. Music is a huge part of Stay True, and I think this is one of the most musical books I've read. At first, Yang Hua becomes interested in music as a way to distinguish himself from his mainstream peers. And later on, yeah,
True. Yeah.
later on,
Facts. Yes, it's true.
music becomes a lens through which you experience reality. And what is your relationship to music these days? And what does it mean for you in life as well as in your creative process?
I think that music is, I don't know if it's true for everyone. I think it's true for a lot of people, but I think music is what taught me how to feel. Like it's what sort of teaches you how to like be a person. Like you learn about love and anarchy and joy and sadness through songs, when you're a kid. And you grow up thinking like, will I feel this? Will I feel this? Like, but it's like a preview of what you could potentially feel, And so I feel like, and there aren't that many songs about friendship, which is something that I thought about a lot over the course of writing this. Every song is like evidence of friendship, I would say, especially like hip hop. I think like all hip hop is basically like the music of friendship. Or at least like a lot of it is, because it's about people doing something together. But there are so many love songs. There aren't that many songs that are just about like friends coexisting. So I think for me as a young person, like music, it could have been literature, it could have been film. I was just looking for a way to triangulate my identity based on my tastes and like based on distinction. And I think that that's a pretty generic thing. A lot of people feel that way. I went to college in part just like searching for the people who are into the exact same esoteric stuff as I was, which is why initially I was like not that interested in being friends with Ken, because he was into like what I consider to be like mainstream music. I think over time, like after he wasn't around anymore, I just had to stop listening to a lot of the music that I listened to up until 1998, which was very strange, but it just felt too freighted with memory. Like there was just a way in which it was just too triggering to listen to all this stuff, and things that were like beautiful and harmonic, melody, like all of these things just no longer felt right to me, because they suggested that like the world could be this beautiful place, but I was just like not trying to feel that. Nowadays music is still like very much part of my everyday. Like I don't like silence. Even like before the Zoom, like even before the Zoom, I was like listening to music up until the very moment when we like turned our cameras on. But it's no longer to learn how to feel or like learn how to be. It's more like, and I'm sure a lot of people feel this way, like when you hear a song you've heard many times, you're kind of also hearing all the other times you've heard it. You know what I mean? Like it's not so much that I crave discovering something new the way I was driven as like a teenager, but it's like I'm hearing all the different times I've heard it. Like I'm remembering all the different places I've heard it. And that sort of like accumulated memory is, I don't know, it's like very, very meaningful to think about things that way. The last thing I'll say about music is that I don't read a ton of memoirs, and I didn't before writing this. And I'm like a writer who likes copying other writers. Like I'll just read like a Joan Didion thing and think like, how would I do that? Like, could I just like adopt this voice and write just like this? And I think a lot of my journalism is sort of derivative of other people. But with this, like I didn't read that many memoirs. So I was looking for a way to structure this book. because we were talking earlier about how it's like kind of circular, it's not really linear. And what occurred to me is that like music and fiction were the feelings that I wanted to achieve. Like the novels of Maxine Hong Kingston, especially Trip Master Monkey or The Woman Warrior, where like all of these things happen, and at the end of the novel, it's like both very melancholy but also very utopian. And Kingston as a novelist is trying to like kind of draw you in as this co-conspirator. Like, I have written this, now you can go off and like tell your own story. And the music of Pharoah Sanders, the jazz musician, where it's like there are these notes of dissonance. It can sound kind of chaotic if you're not prepared for it, but it's also music that's so peaceful and serene. Like things that could do both of these things were like I found that in music, and I found that in certain like fiction writers, and that was the thing that I tried to approximate in the end with this book.
So I love all of that. I smiled during your answer because you said music was a way for me to learn how to feel and become human, when you're growing up.
Yeah.
And I had this very vivid 1 second memory of me listening to a very embarrassing song. This is not a cool song at all. This is just popular back then when I was in middle school. But Mandy Moore's I Wanna Be With You. And
Yeah.
this was right before my first middle school dance. And I heard the song on the radio and I imagined myself slow dancing with a boy and thinking, how romantic would it be if my crush asked me to dance? And so that this is exactly, as you say, we learn how to feel through these songs because we don't have those experiences yet. I haven't been in love yet. I have to approximate it through things like songs. So I love that. And thank you for your answer. Okay, so I think we have a lot of questions in the chat box. I want to leave enough room for it. What was the hardest thing about writing this book, and what was the most fulfilling or joyous thing about writing and or publishing this book?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that last thing you said?
Yeah, so what was the hardest thing about writing / publishing this book, and what was the rewarding or joyful thing about writing or publishing this book?
I mean, the most joyful thing was it took me a while, but once I felt like I had created this world, basically just like the world of like the experience of certain people at Berkeley in like 1995 through 1999, I felt like I was hanging out with us. Like I felt like it felt great, just to be able to kind of hang out with my friends and I as younger people, not in a deeply nostalgic way. Like it's not like I just felt like, oh man, things were better then, but I just felt like I was able to slow down time and just kind of immerse myself in these moments of joy and then of grief as well. And so it's not something that I usually try to do in my writing. Like I'm trying to usually just convey an idea or like translate something. But I don't know, just being able to build a world and just to like walk around in it was something that like I understand. I sort of momentarily glimpsed what novelists can often do. And it was, I don't know, it was really nice. It made me both like very happy and very sad to be able to do that. The hardest part was, I don't know, like it was all, yeah, I don't know what the hardest part was. It was probably just remembering so much and then trying to figure out, I mean, it was probably just like it was probably just all of those years of trying to figure out what I was actually feeling or thinking. Once I actually was able to, as a middle-aged person, it was much easier to do now. But like, I turned to this in my 20s. It was very frustrating, I think, at the time, because there are so many journal entries in like 2002, 2003, where I can already feel things slipping away. And I don't know, it's very sad to think about, just being so conscious of like losing that connection with this thing that is very important to you. But yeah, like when I was writing it, it was actually like very freeing to write a lot of this.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And the world building part, being able to walk around in it and also feel sadness, but also joy in it, I can totally understand. And yeah, I think that is similar to fiction writing for sure. This book is a memoir about many things. It's especially about youth and growing up. Do you have any advice for young people, especially young artists?
That's a tough question. Like I teach college, and so it's interesting to be around young people, and just to think about their struggles. Um, I guess maybe the easiest thing to say would be like, you're actually never as alone as you think you are. Whether that means like in terms of like political struggle or just feeling things. Like I think it's very easy as a young person to think that nobody has ever felt these things before. Whether it's like this experience of loss, or like a lot of the book is also about like kind of political organizing and sort of like mentorship and teaching that I was doing when I was in college. After all, like Berkeley is a place where like a lot of people are involved and stuff like that. But I think it's very humbling to then realize that there are these like traditions that you're a part of, or these lineages, whether it's your family or whether it's um, like a community or like an identity, that you're probably never as alone as you think you are. And that's something that I didn't really realize until I was much older, teaching college students and realizing that, that I felt that kind of connection with them.
I actually love that. And you're totally right. I'm actually feeling this a lot. I'm doing a press tour in Korea. I haven't been back in 20 years. I did a lot of things growing up in the US all by myself that I realize now as an adult that would have totally had a support network had I grown up here. So
Mhm.
I missed out on a lot. And everything that I ever had to do was, I had no connections, and it actually made me very independent and strong. But also I kept telling myself, you're all alone in this. And maybe it's also that mindset that I it was a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because um you know as you say, young people tend to think, I have to do this alone, no one else has ever felt this way. But I love that message of remembering that there are others who care, and that other people have felt this way and encountered the same struggles, and you can do it together. And even amongst your friends, right?
Yeah.
Like your friends are going through the same things. So I love that. We have I have a few more questions, but I feel like we have been racking up a lot of questions from the chat box, and I'm eager to get into them. Like, that's the most important thing. Should I go ahead and read them, or Omar read them? Omar, do you want to come back on if you can?
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Um, sure, I can go ahead and read some of them. Um, Christian Joseph San Jose says, "Hi Hua, how much of the feelings at the moment of Ken's passing were written in as it happened, or was it more like a post-processing kind of reflection, weeks or months or years after? Did you find that there was more clarity in writing it immediately or in pondering about it for a period of time?"
That's a great question. My feelings about like that the immediate passing, that's all stuff that's pretty much just from my journal from that week. Like that week, I actually had to deliver the eulogy at the end of the week. And I think I was designated to do it because I was just constantly writing stuff down. So it seemed like clearly Hua has some thoughts on this. A lot of the stuff that was processed later was more like the significance of conversations we'd had, which I would have had no reason to remember if those conversations continued. but because they were broken, then you sort of like are scavenging and hoarding and dwelling on all these conversations. But a lot of that immediate feeling was like very much just from that moment, and it was very easy to write at the time.
And another question from Christian. You wrote the book for 20 years. Between starting and publication, how much of the original transcript was retained? What parts needed revising, if any, since this is memory based? I could imagine revising only meant finessing style, or if any, rectifying mismatched memory.
It wasn't really written in a very narrative way. I mean, for 20 years, I was just writing, trying to write scenes or trying to write different moments. But I did write in like 2019. I think I wrote a version that was twice as long, and it was pretty easy to cut down to the size that was published. But it was pretty much finished when I finished that that version was twice as long. The stuff I wrote in the interim shows up in bits and pieces in the final text, but it wasn't it wasn't it wasn't a lot of it was just kind of like stray thoughts or just kind of descriptions of days or things that I wanted to get at, or descriptions of like how I was feeling in the moment.
Jacqueline says, I love the way you created the characters in the memoir. Felt like I knew them. Can you talk more about your relationship with your parents versus or vis-a-vis your relationship with your friends?
Yeah, my parents are in the book quite a bit. Not something I was initially expecting, but part of it is like if you read the book at the end of it, there's some sort of like thoughts on family, which kind of explain why the book begins with family too. But my parents, yeah, like they show up a lot because like with music, how I was saying, like music teaches you how to be a person. Like the first people we mimic oftentimes are our parents, and so in the book, I'm not aware that that's what I'm doing. I'm not aware that I'm learning all of these things from them. And in the book and in real life, my father moved back to Taiwan. Like he and my mom immigrated in the 1960s, 1970s separately. They met in the United States. But in the 1980s, he went back to Taiwan for work. And we started exchanging these faxes, which I still have. And so a lot of their characters are sort of like mediated through these faxes with him like helping me with my homework. And I think in the book and in real life, like I had a more distant, it's not like I had a distant relationship with them, but I think when you're young, you're just sort of contractually obliged to not take your parents that seriously or not listen to them as much as you're listening to your friends. And so all of these feelings of like envy and desire and yearning I have for my friends, like I don't have for my parents. But I think that that's actually pretty natural. And I think it makes sense within the context of the book. My parents and I have a great relationship now, but they're sort of just these guardrails for quite a bit of the book.
Yeah, I just watched a YouTube video of you talking about the faxes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Speaking of a bygone era, Doreen mentioned pre-internet, the world was much quieter and many of us felt alone. And then someone else wrote, Michael wrote, you wrote a lot in your book about making mixtapes and driving around, in some cases as a reason just to listen to these mixtapes. Do you lament the fact that kids today will maybe never know these feelings?
I don't personally, because I think that they're experiencing other things. I mean, with the internet, for example, I agree with what Doreen is saying. And I often think about how in the mid 90s, I was on AOL, and nobody would be on the internet during the daytime. Like people would only go online at night because you didn't need to go online at work. You had to dial in, like people weren't using the phone as much at night. And it's not that it was better, but it's just that you stepped into less of the world, that you just had access. All of a sudden you had access to a lot of stuff, but it wasn't an overwhelming amount of stuff the way I think picking up my phone can feel a little overwhelming. And I actually, just a quick plug. I'm just putting this in the chat. So I built all these websites, actually. Like the one behind me in my Zoom background is actually one of the like dozen or so web pages I built, and they're all kind of hidden on my website. But they're sort of like my attempt to recreate some of like how the old internet felt. Like you can click on all of these different things and they lead you to different like videos or different playlists. I don't necessarily think, I think young people are just, they have a different version of whatever mixtapes were for me. I think for me, it was like, I am curating my identity onto this like 60-minute tape or this 90-minute tape, and then I'm giving it to someone else. And part of how it functioned is like, now you look back and you're like, oh, it was so much easier for me to like curate my life into this 90-minute tape. I'm sure someone who's 18 now is doing some version of that and will then look back upon it fondly in like 2045 or whatever. They'll say like, oh, remember when like Instagram was a thing, or like there will be different versions, I think, of that feeling. But I mean, I personally miss it, but that's just because like I enjoyed doing that. But I'm not going to make my kid make mixtapes because he will then like rebel against me in ways that I don't want. So
I was part of the mix CD little intergeneration. So,
yeah, another great moment in civilization.
yes, yes. um, Christian has another question. Did you ever remember the origin of Ken and Yours Sign Off, Stay True, which is the title of the book?
I don't actually remember it. It's one of the many things that circa 1998, I wrote in my journal, like, and I will never forget what this meant and what that meant. But of course, I forgot. I do remember like we had this like handshake that went with it, but I don't know where it came from. Yeah, but I sort of prefer it that way. The title takes on like a few different meanings in the book itself.
Juhei, do you have any? You said you had a couple more questions.
I do. So I debated whether to ask this because I don't like spoilers. I hate spoilers. I don't think this is a spoiler because we already know at the beginning that Ken passes away, but there is a touching scene after his passing where you notice flies everywhere you go, and you become convinced that this is a sign.
Yeah.
And this felt very true to life, the way we need things to signify in order to make sense of reality.
Yeah.
Did you experience any of these symbolic or inexplicable moments throughout the writing or the publishing of this book? And I have also experienced such remarkable incidents during my creative process, and I'm curious to see if you also felt a presence or a sign.
Absolutely. And I think it's partly what like the human brain needs to do sometimes to make sense of things, is just to see signs or to assume that there's like higher power or like some sort of like omnipresence. But yeah, like essentially after his passing, I would just see flies like I would be writing in my journal and then a fly would land, or I'd be smoking a cigarette and a fly would land on my cigarette. Flies are not like the rarest creature, but there was just something about it. Like I would be on the airplane going to the funeral and a fly would be buzzing around me. I'm like, there's usually aren't flies like on planes. And then at the actual funeral home, as I approached the casket, like a fly lands. And so I did become, and I still am, I still do notice these things. When it's a moment where it would feel like, you know, like when it feels like a weighty moment. I did feel it actually this week because the San Diego Padres, which were his favorite baseball team, we would always talk about how the Padres. I don't know if there's anyone here from San Diego or who's a baseball fan, but they're not like the best baseball team. And he would always try and write for my zine and say, and he was always like talking up the Padres, and I was always dismissing him and the Padres. But the year he died, they made it to the World Series, and there was this moment that I write about in the book, when it looked like they could actually like stand a chance in the World Series. But then this thing happened, the Yankees won. It's one of the reasons I hate the Yankees. But the Padres actually made it to the playoffs this year. And I was texting with his mother, I was texting some other friends. I'm like, and it's sort of like this unspoken thing where it's like, hey, like the Padres are actually like in the playoffs again. And they haven't been in the playoffs since 1998, that year. And so I was feeling very, very much like I will believe in a higher power if the Padres win. They were eliminated earlier this week, and I was much sadder than I thought I would be, because I think I was like really looking for this sign. But you know, like that's, you know, it's, yeah. So I still do think about these things and look for these things. And I think like we need to look for these things sometimes just to kind of feel less alone, you know, and as though, and connected to something bigger than ourselves. So long-winded answer, but
no, it makes
yeah,
a
I was
lot
really
of
hoping the Padres would somehow win it all this year.
yeah. Oh, that would have been so special.
Yeah.
Okay, you can choose. It's either, can you talk about the cover or what are you working on next? Or should we do both? We have 3 minutes and I don't know what the time constraint is, but I know that you had a hand in the cover. You wanted a certain thing very desperately. The designer came up with something else. Can you talk a little bit more about the origin story?
Yeah, I didn't really have, I mean, it was just sort of beyond the scope of my imagination what the cover could be, but it's just a cover. The cover is a photo of him that our friend Anthony took, and basically my editor Thomas saw
Mm,
the photo and he said that would actually be a great cover.
mm,
And I hadn't really wanted a photo. I hadn't wanted a picture on the, I didn't know what I wanted, but then when I saw it, I realized that it was like pretty perfect. Yeah, no, I mean, it just sort of, it perfectly captures a vibe, I would say, like, or a sort of shade
it
that
does.
is very California.
California. You talk about the orange of the
Yeah,
sunset at some point, and it is a nod to that. And I love that he's looking through the camera. So he's looking at you, you're looking at him, both capturing one another, and his face is obscured. Like it's truly very, very in keeping with the spirit of the book. And I think it's
yeah,
beautifully captured and vivid. I love that it's so vivid and stunning. It's really, really stunning. And we know because we're authors how much the jacket matters, like critically, commercially. It's like very, very important, right? And yes, you can buy a signed copy, you guys. Like keep on buying these signed copies through the website. I'm gonna read a couple
every
questions.
signature is different. So
Oh, really? Oh my goodness. That's, it's something that you can keep forever in your library, everyone. So Grace Wong asks, hi, Hua, I love the part in the book where your parents discovered Bob Dylan from hearing it through a neighbor's window. Reading the book made me think a lot about music discovery these days happening online mostly. Is that something you think about or try to avoid at all?
no, I still love discovering new things. It's not the same as when you're younger, obviously, because I just have less emotion to actually like feel things, I would say.
Mm.
Partly just because, parenthood or whatnot. But I do a lot of I try and discover things through like the most random ways possible. So like I'll, someone will post something on Instagram and then I'll just sort of do this quasi like cyber stalking thing where if someone posts something, then I'll like go through their profile to figure out like what else they've posted, or I'll just start following random strangers on Bandcamp or Spotify and just sort of, if we have like one song in common, then I'll just sort of like try and do this deep dive into like all the other things this person has bought. So I'm still into discovery, but it's not necessarily yeah, like in the book, my dad starts listening to Bob Dylan because like someone's playing it through the walls of their boarding house. And that happens less, just sort of like the physical being like physically present while discovering something. But yeah, I mean, I still love hearing new things.
I love that you still do deep dives,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that's totally who you are. You have the curatorial instinct, and
Yeah,
I love that that's still a part of who you are. And who we are changes, but it also stays the same. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So
Well,
that part of you really stayed.
like all the random websites I made, a lot of them link to like YouTube videos I like or like documentaries that are online. And yeah, like I will stay up when I'm procrastinating, I'll just go on YouTube and try and find like good things that are really good that have like less than 100 views or something. And
Mm.
so I do still, I don't know. It's like it is more fun in a way to look for stuff because that things are no longer obscure. Like in the 80s and 90s, 2000s, like things could be obscure and then they would be forgotten forever. But now, like nothing's really obscure. It's just not yet viral. It's just not yet discovered. And so it's kind of fun to happen upon, um, some artist who is like on the internet and so like in public, but who has yet to like get more than like 100 views or something. So yeah, it's still part of who I am.
So just a side note, what I
Yeah.
really admire about that is your endless curiosity. And curiosity is something that I had a lot of when I was younger, but it's something that I feel myself losing over time and forcing myself to continue keep up with,
Yeah.
because I need to continue to expose myself to different forms of art in order to be inspired. But it's not something that I am like, you know, instantly flooded with. And I love the fact that you seem to have this curiosity that keeps you going out there, like discovering new things. So that it's one of, I think it's an important element of being a creative and being an artist, I think. Christian Joseph from San Jose, you mentioned you are still friends up to now with 90% of the people you mentioned in the book. Can you share ways to stay connected with people you've met earlier in life, other than, of course, having a shared history or tragedy, however you see it?
Um, I'm not sure. I mean, I think just I mean, there's like a part of the book that's about like gift giving. Like there's a part of the book where I talk about like different philosophies of like giving gifts. And in this case, it's sort of like I think just I don't know, checking in on people, letting people know that they're in your thoughts, but not in a routine way, not according to the calendar. Like I'm
Mm.
bad at giving someone a gift on their birthday, but I like giving people things. It's just sort of like I think just the old adage of like checking in on your friends is very significant, especially if it's not kind of on a predictable cycle.
Mm. I actually love that part of gift giving, because your trust and your friendship really happens between when you extend your goodwill and when they also return the goodwill. There is an assumption that it will be returned someday, but you don't know in what shape or form or when. And it is so true of human relationships, right?
Yeah.
So I think maybe another way to answer that question is to keep on having that back and forth without a firm expectation, but knowing that you keep on building this together. So that
Yeah.
was a beautiful reflection on friendship. I think that, do we have some more comments in the chat? Should we talk a little bit about what you're working on next, just very quickly? Because I think everybody's very curious.
Sure. I'm writing a book called Imposter Syndrome. It's like a collection of essays on imposter syndrome, which is this idea that a lot of people, particularly like women, people of color, like once you there's this feeling of insecurity that, you know, perhaps you haven't, perhaps you'll be found out as some like fraud, or perhaps there's been some mistake and that you shouldn't actually be like enjoying the success. A lot of like highly successful people feel it. So it's not really a book about necessarily diagnosing it or like what you should do, but it's about performance, mimicry, kind of like how we figure out who we are based on like teaching and learning. I'm being vague because I haven't started it yet. It's just something that I'm contractually obliged to do and I'm interested in doing. But yeah, so look out for imposter syndrome at some point in the next decade.
Okay. And I love that you're giving yourself that much time, because good books take a long time.
I am.
A long
I
time.
would. My editor would not like saying that, but I know he's not on this Zoom. So
Oh, Bill Thomas? Is it Bill Thomas?
it's Thomas. This other guy, Thomas Gubermadine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. I did work on the same floor at Knopf, so I know some of those names. But this was delightful, and I will hand it over to Omar.
Thanks so much. Wow, this has just been so amazing. Yeah, thanks so much to Hua and Juhea for joining us, and thanks to all of you in the audience. If you joined us late or want to go back and rewatch the program, you can do so on our YouTube channel. I dropped a link in the chat, but you could also go on YouTube and look up Mark Twain programs. We also have an educational channel as well. Yeah, you can also check out our events page to see all our upcoming programs. I'm going to drop a link in the chat for that as well. And that's also on our website. So thank you again for joining us. And please join us again soon. Have a great night. Have a great day, Juhea.
Yeah, have a great day.
Bye.
And have a good night, everyone.